She pressed both hands flat against the door of a stranger's house and told herself she would not cry. Not here. Not in front of a man she had never met. Not after the Hargrove family had handed her a week's wages, thanked her for 3 years of service, and told her very politely that their new housekeeper was starting Monday. The new girl was 22 and slender and pretty, and no one said that out loud, but Abigail Turner had been alive long enough to understand what words people chose not to say. She stood on Nathan Cole's porch in the sharp Montana wind with one canvas bag hanging from her wrist, and knocked twice, and she made herself a promise that she intended to keep. She was done expecting kindness from anyone. If this story moved something in you, I want you to subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because I promise you, it does not end the way you think it will. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Every single comment means the world to me, and I read every one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Red Creek, Montana. Autumn 1884. The wind came off the mountains early that October, and it did not apologize for arriving. It pushed through the gaps in storefronts and rattled the shingles on the saloon roof and moved the dust along the main street in long, slow waves, as though the town itself was exhaling. Red Creek was not a prosperous place. It was the kind of town that had been almost something once almost large enough for a proper bank, almost busy enough for a hotel with more than 4 rooms, almost important enough for the railroad to consider running a line through. And then the moment had passed, and the town had settled into being exactly what it was, which was a collection of people who had either chosen to stay or simply forgotten to leave. Abigail Turner arrived on the morning stage with $11 in her coat pocket and a canvas bag that held everything she owned in the world. She was 29 years old. She had round cheeks and heavy arms and wide hips, and a way of moving through a room that made smaller women step aside without quite knowing why. She had dark hair she kept pinned back tightly, and brown eyes that had learned over many years not to reveal too much of what she was actually thinking. She was not what most men in 1884 would have called handsome, and she had known that about herself for long enough that the knowing no longer felt like new information. It was simply a fact she carried the way a woman carries a scar. Not with pride, not with shame, just with the quiet resignation of someone who has stopped waiting for the world to see things differently. She had worked as a housekeeper for 11 years, the Denton family in Billings, the Hargrove family in Great Falls. 2 families before those whose names she no longer let herself think about because the remembering only made the leaving feel worse than it already did. Every family had thanked her when they let her go. Every family had called her capable and dependable and a wonderful help. And every single time, the new girl who arrived after Abigail left was younger and prettier, and Abigail never asked anyone to confirm what she had already figured out on her own. She had read Nathan Cole's advertisement in the Great Falls Gazette on a Tuesday morning while sitting at the kitchen table of the Hargrove house 3 days after Mrs. Hargrove had told her they were going in a different direction. The advertisement was short. Most advertisements tried to say too much, which always made Abigail suspicious, because in her experience, people who used too many words were usually trying to cover something up. Nathan Cole had used almost none. Need a capable woman to keep my house. Honest work. Fair pay. Nothing more. That was the whole of it. No mention of a family. No mention of a wife. No promises about the quality of the accommodations or the generosity of the meals. Just 3 sentences and a name and a town she had never been to. She had read it twice, and then she had folded the paper along its crease and put it in her coat pocket, and she had written Nathan Cole a letter that same afternoon. She told him she was capable and available, and that she would arrive the following Monday if the position was still open. She did not describe herself beyond what was useful. She saw no reason to. His reply came 4 days later. It contained 2 sentences. Position is still open. Come on Monday. She came on Monday. The stage let her off at the edge of the main street just after 9 in the morning, and she stood for a moment with her canvas bag and looked at the town. A man loading supplies outside the general store glanced at her and then looked away. 2 women walking together on the opposite side of the street noticed her, and leaned slightly toward each other without slowing their pace. A boy sitting on a barrel watched her with the frank, unguarded curiosity that only children allow themselves. Abigail looked at none of them for long. She asked a woman near the post office where she might find the Cole property on the eastern edge of town, and the woman gave her directions in the tone of someone who had decided something already and was simply choosing not to say it. The walk to Nathan Cole's farmhouse took about 12 minutes. She used the time to steady herself. This was a trick she had developed over years of arriving as a stranger in other people's houses. She gave herself the length of the walk to feel everything she needed to feel, and by the time she knocked on the door, she had folded it all back down into something manageable. She knocked. She waited. She knocked again. The door opened. Nathan Cole was not what she had pictured from 2 sentences on a page, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had pictured. He was taller than she expected, broad through the shoulders and thick through the forearms in the way of men who work with their hands every day of their lives. He had a square jaw and dark hair going gray at the temples, and eyes the color of creek water in early spring, somewhere between gray and green and entirely serious. He was not a man whose face offered much. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to measure accurately, not unkindly, not warmly, just carefully. "Miss Turner," he said. "Yes," she said. "Mr. Cole." He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in, then." She came in. The farmhouse was smaller than she'd imagined, and neater than she'd expected. A man living alone had kept his floors swept, and his dishes stacked, and his bed made, which told her something. There was a stone fireplace at one end of the main room, and a solid oak table with 2 chairs and a kitchen that had everything it needed and nothing extra. It was a house that had been maintained without being loved, and the difference between those 2 things was something Abigail understood the moment she stepped through the door. A maintained house looks after itself. A loved house looks after the people in it. This house was doing the first thing, and had long since stopped doing the second. "The position is straightforward," Nathan said. He did not offer her a seat, but he did not seem rude about it. He seemed like a man who had forgotten that offering a seat was a thing people did. "Breakfast before I leave for the forge each morning. Dinner when I return in the evening. The house kept clean. Whatever else needs doing, use your judgment. I won't be looking over your shoulder." "What time do you leave in the morning?" Abigail asked. 5:30. "And return?" "Depends on the work. Never past 7. She nodded. "I'll need to know where you keep your supplies and what you're short of." "Pantry's through there." He nodded toward the kitchen. "Help yourself to a look. Make a list of what you need, and I'll settle it at the general store." "Is there a budget I should work within?" He looked at her as though this was a question he hadn't considered. "Within reason?" he said. "What does within reason mean to you, Mr. Cole?" There was a pause. "It means don't waste it." "I don't waste things," she said. Something shifted slightly in his expression. It wasn't a smile, not quite, but it was the nearest thing to one she had seen from him. "Good," he said. "Then we'll get along fine." He showed her the spare room where she would sleep. It was small and plain, with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out toward the mountain range in the distance. A hook on the wall for her coat. A braided rug on the floor. It was the kind of room that said, "You are welcome to stay here," and nothing more. "It'll do," Abigail said. "Good." He picked up his coat from the hook near the front door. "I need to get back to the forge. You'll find everything you need to make yourself comfortable." He paused. "Or comfortable enough." "Mr. Cole," she said. He stopped, turned. "Thank you for the position." He looked at her for a moment, that same careful measuring look. "Thank you for coming," he said, and then he left. She stood alone in the farmhouse and listened to his boots on the porch steps and the sound of the door settling back into its frame. Then she set her canvas bag on the narrow bed in the spare room, took off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. She started in the kitchen because kitchens told you the most about a person. Nathan Cole's kitchen told her that he was a man who ate to stay alive, rather than because he took any pleasure in it. There was dried meat and hard biscuit and a bag of coffee beans and very little else. There was a cast iron skillet that hadn't been properly seasoned in months, and a bread tin that had clearly not been used in longer than that. She made a list on the back of an envelope she found in the pantry flour lard. Dried beans, salt pork, cornmeal potatoes, onions, butter eggs. The basics. The things a kitchen needed before it could become something. She went to the general store that afternoon with her list and the $10 Nathan had left on the table without being asked. The man behind the counter, heavy-set with the reddish nose of someone who enjoyed his evenings too much, looked her over. The way men in every town she had ever been to looked her over with the lazy, brief assessment of someone deciding she was not worth looking at for long. "You the new housekeeper out at the coal place?" he asked. "I am," she said. He reached for her list. "He goes through 'em pretty fast." "I'm sorry. Housekeepers." He began pulling items from the shelves. "Had 3 in the last 2 years. Last one barely made it 2 months before she said the man was too quiet and the house was too lonesome and she'd rather work at the hotel." He set a bag of flour on the counter. Course the one before that left because she got the impression he wasn't ever going to see her as anything other than hired help. Which, he shrugged. Well, suppose that's what she was. Abigail watched him work through her list. "I expect that's what I am too," she said pleasantly. He glanced at her, seemed to decide she wasn't being difficult. "Suppose so," he said. "Anything else? A pound of dried apples if you have them." "I do." "Then yes." She paid for the supplies and carried them back to the farmhouse in 2 trips because she was strong and she did not like making more trips than necessary. She put everything away in the pantry in the order she would need it, which was a system she had developed over 11 years of other people's kitchens, and then she started on dinner because Nathan had said he would be back no later than 7, and it was already past 5. She made a beef stew with the salt pork and onions and potatoes with cornbread on the side and strong coffee, and she had everything on the table at 6:15. At 6:20, she heard boots on the porch steps. Nathan Cole came through the door and stopped. He looked at the table. He looked at the food. He looked at her, where she was standing near the kitchen doorway, with her sleeves still rolled up. "Sit down," she said. "It's hot." He sat down. He ate. He did not speak much, but she had not expected him to. What she had not expected was the way he slowed down halfway through the meal, the way a person slows down when they are tasting something they had forgotten they enjoyed. He did not say anything about the food, but when she refilled his coffee cup without being asked, he looked up at her with that gray-green gaze and said, "Thank you, Miss Turner." "You're welcome, Mr. Cole," she said, and that was the whole of their first evening together. She lay in the narrow bed in the spare room that night and listened to the wind working its way around the corners of the farmhouse. And she thought about the Hargrove house and the Denton house and all the houses before them. And she told herself firmly that this was the same as all the others. A job, a wage, a roof over her head until something changed, because something always changed. She was not entirely wrong about that. Something did change. She just had no way of knowing yet what kind of change it would be. The second morning, she was up at 5 o'clock and had eggs and salt pork and fresh cornbread on the table by 6:30. Nathan came out of his room at 25 past, already dressed, already wearing the particular expression of a man who had decided what the day required of him. He sat down and ate without comment, and when he stood to leave, he took his coat from the hook and paused. "You didn't have to be up this early," he said. "You said you leave at 5:30, she said. "I did. Then I needed to be up at 5. He looked at her for a moment. "Most people would have tested it, started later, seen what I'd say." "I'm not most people," she said. He put on his coat. "No," he said. "I'm beginning to see that." He left. She cleared the dishes and started on the house. The farmhouse had 3 rooms beyond the kitchen. The main room with the fireplace, Nathan's bedroom, and her own small room at the back. And she worked through all of them over the course of the morning with the methodical patience of someone who had done this work long enough to do it without thinking about it, which meant she could think about other things instead. She thought about the way the main room felt neat but emptied out, as though someone had removed not just the clutter, but the warmth along with it. There were no photographs, no small decorations, nothing on the walls. The mantelpiece above the fireplace was bare. She had seen this before in the homes of widowers and confirmed bachelors, this particular kind of tidiness that was less about cleanliness and more about the absence of anything personal enough to miss. She did not touch anything she had not been asked to touch. She dusted. She swept. She beat the rugs on the porch railing until the dust came out of them in clouds. She found a torn work shirt hanging on the back of Nathan's bedroom door, just visible through the open doorway, and she took it down and mended it with the small sewing kit she kept in her canvas bag, and she put it back on the hook when she was done. He noticed that evening. He came home, ate the dinner she had prepared, and then he went to his bedroom for something. And when he came back out, he was holding the shirt. He looked at the mended seam along the shoulder. He looked at her. "I didn't ask you to do this," he said. "No," she agreed. "You didn't." "I would have gotten around to it." "I know." He looked at the shirt again, put it back over his arm. "It's good work," he said, and went back to his room. She counted that as a victory, which told her something about what kind of victories she had learned to be grateful for. By the end of the first week, she had settled into the rhythms of his house, the way water settles into the shape of whatever contains it. She knew what time he rose and what he liked in his coffee, and that he ate more when the food was warm, and that he would sit by the fire for exactly 20 minutes after dinner before going to bed, not reading, not sleeping, just sitting, which she had decided after careful observation was his version of thinking. She did not intrude on those 20 minutes. She cleared the dishes quietly and banked the fire and went to her own room, and she let him have those 20 minutes the way she would have let a man have his one private corner of quiet. On Saturday of that first week, a woman came to the door. She was perhaps 40, handsome, in the sharp, efficient way of women who have always known what they wanted, with honey-colored hair and the kind of dress that said she cared about being seen. She stood in the open doorway and looked past Abigail at the interior of the house with the expression of someone taking inventory. "You must be the new housekeeper," she said. "I must be," said Abigail. "Clara Finch." She extended a gloved hand with the air of someone accustomed to having it shaken. "My father owns the mill on the north end of town. Nathan and I are old acquaintances." "I'll let him know you called," Abigail said. "He's at the forge." Clara Finch looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since arriving at the door. The look was the kind Abigail had grown used to from women like Clara Finch. It started at the top and moved downward and arrived at a conclusion before it had even finished traveling. "I'm sure he'll be back soon," Clara said. "I'll wait." "Of course," said Abigail. "Come in." She brought Clara Finch into the main room and offered her coffee, which Clara accepted with a small, tight smile. Abigail brought the coffee and set it on the table, and went back to the kitchen, where she continued preparing the evening's dinner without rushing and without speaking and without giving Clara Finch anything beyond the minimum requirements of hospitality. Nathan came home at 6:30. He found Clara in his main room, and his face did something complicated that Abigail caught from the kitchen doorway before she looked away. "Clara," he said, "I didn't know you were coming." "I wanted to see how you were settling in with the new arrangement," Clara said warmly. "Make sure you were being properly looked after." From the kitchen, Abigail heard the particular quality of silence that Nathan Cole produced when he did not want to say what he was thinking. "I'm being looked after fine," he said. "She seems very—" Clara paused. "Capable." "She is," Nathan said. Another silence. Then, "Nathan, I wanted to speak with you about the Founders' Day Committee. We need someone to donate ironwork for the decorations, and I thought—" "Clara." His voice was level. "Come back another time. Miss Turner's got dinner on the table." There was a pause that Abigail suspected contained a great deal of information. Then she heard Clara Finch set down her coffee cup. "Of course," Clara said pleasantly. "Another time." She left. The door settled back into its frame. Nathan came into the kitchen doorway and stood there for a moment with his arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular. "She come by while I was out?" he asked. "About an hour ago," Abigail said. "She said you were old acquaintances." Should I not have let her in?" He looked at her. "You did right," he said. "You couldn't have known. She wanted to ask. She didn't ask." There were things in a man's history that he had to choose to share in his own time, and she had lived in enough houses to know that pressing too early was the fastest way to close a door that might have opened on its own. "Dinner's ready," she said instead. "Good," he said, and he sat down. She served him his dinner and poured his coffee, and they ate in the particular quiet that had become already after only 1 week their quiet, the kind that didn't require filling with words because it wasn't empty. It was just two people sharing a table in the way of people who had learned not to need noise in order to feel the presence of another human being. She was washing the dishes when he spoke from across the room. "Miss Turner." She turned. He was sitting in his chair by the fire, looking at the flames with his hands loose on his knees. He did not look at her when he spoke. "Clara Finch has had her eye on this house for 3 years," he said, "on what she thinks this house could be if the right woman were running it." He paused. "I want you to know that she will come back, and she will not be kind to you." Abigail dried her hands on her apron. "I've managed unkind before," she said. He looked at her then. The firelight caught the angles of his face and made him look older and younger at the same time, and she saw something in his expression that she had not seen there before. Not pity, not admiration, just recognition. The look of a man who had just understood something he had not expected to understand. "I believe you have," he said quietly. She turned back to her dishes. The fire crackled. The wind moved around the corners of the farmhouse. In the narrow bed in her spare room later that night, she lay on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and told herself firmly and clearly that this was a job. That this was a wage. That this man was her employer and this house was her workplace, and that was the entirety of what this was. She told herself that with complete conviction. She almost believed it. The morning Clara Finch came back, Abigail was elbow-deep in bread dough and did not hear the knock the first time. She heard it the second time. 3 sharp raps, the kind a person uses when they want to make it clear they are not accustomed to waiting. Abigail wiped her hands on her apron, crossed the main room, and opened the door. Clara stood on the porch with 2 women behind her like a small, well-dressed army. One was thin and gray-haired with the pinched expression of someone who had swallowed something sour years ago and never quite recovered. The other was younger, maybe 30, pretty in a forgettable way, and holding a covered dish with both hands as though it gave her something to do with herself. "Good morning," Clara said. Her smile arrived first and her eyes arrived second, and the two did not quite match. "We've come to call on Nathan. We're on the Ladies' Auxiliary Committee, and we had some business to discuss." "Mr. Cole is at the forge," Abigail said. "Oh, we know his schedule." Clara's gaze moved past Abigail's shoulder into the house. "We thought we'd wait. Dorothy brought a pie." Dorothy, apparently the younger one, lifted the dish slightly as evidence. Abigail looked at the 3 of them. She stepped back from the door. "Come in then," she said. She brought them into the main room and poured coffee she had not planned on making, and stood in the kitchen doorway while they settled themselves at Nathan's table, as though they had sat there many times before, which Abigail suspected was precisely the impression they were trying to create. "You've done something with the curtains," Clara observed. "I washed them," Abigail said. Clara ran one gloved finger along the edge of the table, slowly checking for dust. She found none. Something tightened almost imperceptibly around her mouth. Nathan never used to bother with things like that. "I imagine he was busy," Abigail said. The gray-haired woman Clara had introduced her as Mrs. Pruitt turned in her chair to look at Abigail directly. She had the particular kind of gaze that was designed to make a person feel measured and found wanting. "How long do you intend to stay?" she asked. It was not a polite question. It was the kind of question shaped to look like one. "As long as Mr. Cole needs me," Abigail said. The last 3 girls lasted 2 months between them, Mrs. Pruitt said pleasantly. He's not an easy man. I haven't found him difficult. Mrs. Pruitt looked at her the way a cat looks at something it hasn't decided to bother with yet. Clara set down her coffee cup. You must find it lonely out here, she said. Her voice had gone softer, more sympathetic, which Abigail had learned over many years was rarely a good sign. A woman like you so far from well. Wherever you came from. I'm from Great Falls, Abigail said. It's not so different. No, I meant... Clara paused, arranged her smile. A woman in your situation, alone, without connections in town. I just wonder if it gets difficult. Abigail looked at her steadily. I keep busy, she said. She went back to her bread dough. She could hear the 3 of them talking in the main room, voices low enough to be private, but not low enough to be inaudible. And she did not strain to hear them because she already knew the shape of what they were saying. She had heard versions of it in every town she had ever worked in. It was the same conversation with different faces. The words were always polite. The meaning was never. She had the bread shaped and in the tin and the dough resting under a cloth by the time she heard boots on the porch steps. Nathan came through the door and stopped. He took in the 3 women at his table in one quick glance, and something moved across his face, too fast to name. Clara, he said. Nathan. She stood immediately, smoothing her skirt. We were just keeping your Miss Turner company. He looked at Abigail. She was standing in the kitchen doorway with flour on her forearms, and her expression arranged carefully into nothing in particular. She managing to survive the company, he said. It was the driest thing she had heard him say in 3 weeks, and she had to work to keep her face still. Of course, Clara laughed. She touched his arm briefly, the kind of touch that claimed something without asking permission. We brought a pie. Dorothy made it. Dorothy held up the pie again. Nathan looked at it. That's kind, he said. He did not sound particularly moved. I can't talk business today, Clara. I've got 2 orders to finish by Friday, and I came home early to eat and get back to it. Clara's smile held. It was a well-practiced smile. We won't keep you. But the Founders' Day decorations, we really do need an answer, Nathan. My answer is the same as last time. He moved past her toward the kitchen. Send me the measurements, and I'll see what I can do. Beyond that, I've got nothing to offer. Clara watched him go. Her smile did not falter, but it changed in quality, became something harder and more deliberate. She turned back to Abigail and lowered her voice just enough. He's always been like this, she said, almost confidentially. Since Margaret passed, he's just closed himself off. It's such a shame. A man like that. She tilted her head. I imagine you've noticed. Abigail looked at her. Mr. Cole has always been straightforward with me, she said. Of course he has. Clara picked up her gloves. Just between women. Do be careful. Men like Nathan, they don't always know what they need. And sometimes the people around them get attached without realizing that the situation was never meant to be permanent. The room was very quiet for a moment. Thank you for the advice, Abigail said. She held the door open. Clara left. Mrs. Pruitt followed, and Dorothy with her pie dish, and Abigail closed the door behind all 3 of them, and stood for a moment with her hand still on the latch. From the kitchen, Nathan's voice. They gone? Yes, she said. Good. A pause. Then, what did Clara say to you at the end there? Abigail turned. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee watching her. She gave me some advice, Abigail said. What kind? The kind I didn't ask for. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, She's been trying to run this house for 3 years. I want you to know that everything she said to you was about that. I know, Abigail said. You knew while she was saying it. About 30 seconds in. Something shifted in his face, that same near smile she had seen once before on the very first morning. Good, he said. He turned back to his coffee. Don't let her rattle you. She'll keep coming back. She won't rattle me, Abigail said. He glanced over his shoulder at her. "No," he said slowly. "I don't suppose she will." He left for the forge 20 minutes later. She went back to her bread. That was the 4th week. By the 6th week, the town had formed its opinion of Abigail Turner, and she had formed her opinion of the town, and neither party felt the need to pretend the other was wrong. She went to the general store twice a week, and she nodded to the people she passed, and she answered questions directly, and did not offer more information than was requested. She was polite. She was not warm. She had learned long ago that warmth offered freely in a new place was usually taken as weakness rather than kindness, and she did not have the energy to be mistaken for weak. What she had not expected was the Reverend's wife. She was coming out of the general store on a Thursday morning in the 7th week, her basket over one arm, when a woman fell into step beside her with the comfortable ease of someone who had decided they were going the same direction and saw no reason to announce it. "You're the woman at the coal place," the woman said. She was perhaps 50, with a round, comfortable face and gray hair wound loosely at the back of her head, and the kind of voice that suggested she had spent a great deal of her life saying difficult things gently. "I'm Mabel Hurst. My husband runs the church on 2nd Street. "Abigail Turner," Abigail said. "I know." Mabel walked beside her without any apparent agenda. "I've been meaning to come introduce myself, but I kept missing the right moment. How are you finding Red Creek?" "Quiet," Abigail said. "It is that. Some people call it peaceful. Others call it—" Mabel considered. "Something less charitable." She glanced at Abigail sideways. "Has Clara Finch been by?" Abigail looked at her. Twice. Mabel made a sound in her throat that managed to contain an entire opinion without using any words. "I thought so. She comes by everyone who gets close to Nathan. She doesn't mean any great harm by it. I think she just has a very clear idea of what she wants and not much patience for obstacles." She paused. "You're not going to let her drive you off, are you?" "No," Abigail said. "Good." Mabel said it with the satisfaction of someone checking something off a list. "Nathan Cole is the most stubborn, most sealed-up man in this county, and he is also, if you get past all of that, one of the finest people I have ever known. He was different before Margaret died. Not different in character. He was always quiet, but different in the way water is different when it's moving. Margaret dying the way she did so close to the wedding, and then well." She stopped herself, looked at Abigail. "You don't know about any of that. He hasn't told me anything about his past," Abigail said. "Of course he hasn't." Mabel shook her head. "He wouldn't. He thinks protecting people from difficult things is the same as being kind." She paused at the corner of the street. "I'm only telling you this because you look like a woman who's going to stay, and if you're going to stay, you ought to know who you're dealing with." "What happened?" Abigail asked. She kept her voice even. Margaret was a school teacher. She came down sick in February, just a fever at first. Nothing anyone was worried about. She was dead by April, 3 weeks before the wedding. Mabel was quiet for a moment. Nathan finished building the house himself, every board. Came into services the Sunday after the funeral, sat in the back row, didn't speak to anyone left before the final hymn. That was the last time he came to church, 6 years ago. She looked at Abigail steadily. He hired the first housekeeper 6 months after that, then the second, then the third. I don't think he knew what he was looking for. I think he just knew the house felt wrong, empty. Abigail stood on the corner of the street and held her basket and let all of that settle into the place in her chest where she kept the things she needed to think about later. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Don't feel sorry for him," Mabel said. "He'll hate that worse than anything. Just be steady. He responds to steady." She smiled suddenly, the wide, easy smile of a woman who had made up her mind about something and was comfortable with her decision. "Come to church Sunday if you've a mind to. I'll introduce you properly. There are some women here who are worth knowing, even if Clara Finch has gotten to them first." She patted Abigail's arm and walked on down the street. Abigail walked home. She made dinner. Nathan came home. They ate in their quiet, the particular quiet that had become something she had started in the privacy of her own thoughts to think of as theirs. And across the table she looked at the man who had built his own house with his own hands for a woman who died 3 weeks before she could live in it, and she thought about 6 years of maintained rooms and no photographs and a mantelpiece left bare on purpose, and she said nothing about any of it. She said, "The flower's almost gone. I'll need more before Friday." He said, "I'll bring some home tomorrow." She said, "Thank you." He said, "It's nothing." And that was all. 3 days later, she went into the main room to bank the fire for the night and found him still sitting in his chair 20 minutes past the time he usually went to bed, with a piece of paper in his hand that he folded closed the moment she came in. He looked up. Something was different in his face, pulled tighter, flatter, the way a face goes when a person has been wrestling with something that won't lie still. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Fine." He set the paper on the side table face down. "Just some correspondence." She went to bank the fire and said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. She had spent 11 years perfecting it. But when she turned to go to her room, he said, "Miss Turner." She stopped. "How long do you plan on staying?" His voice was level, not unfriendly, just direct, the way he asked every question. She turned to face him. "As long as you need me," she said. "That's what I told you from the start. Clara says—" He stopped, started again. "I've heard some talk, in town, about you staying here." "What kind of talk?" He looked at the fire. "The usual kind. People speculating, deciding what things mean." He paused. "I wanted you to know I don't have any opinion about what they're saying, and I don't want you to feel—" He stopped again, the way a man stops when he has gotten to the edge of something he doesn't know how to say. "I want you to feel free to leave if you decide this isn't the right position, without feeling like you owe me anything." She looked at him for a long time. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I've been in 7 houses in 11 years. Every single one of those families told me at some point that I was free to leave. Usually right before they were about to ask me to leave. Are you telling me I'm free to go because you want me to go?" His head came up. "No," he said. It was sharp and immediate, the most unguarded word she had heard from him. "Then I'm staying," she said, "and I don't particularly care what they're saying in town." He looked at her with that gray-green measuring gaze. Then he looked back at the fire. "All right," he said. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and told herself that the way her heart was beating was because she had been walking too fast, which was not true, and she knew it was not true, and she lay there for a long time before she fell asleep. The letter on the side table was from Clara Finch. She did not know that for certain, but she knew it the way you know certain things in the part of yourself that had stopped needing proof. The week after that, the temperature dropped sharply. Nathan came home one evening in the middle of November with his jaw set and his hands stiff from the cold, and sat down at the dinner table and ate without speaking, which was not different from any other evening, except that when he looked up from his plate, there was something behind his eyes that she had not seen before. "Tom Briggs came in today," he said. She looked at him. "The land agent." "He's not a land agent. He calls himself one." Nathan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "He's been buying up property along the eastern line, mine included. He came in today to tell me what he's offering." "What is he offering?" "Not enough." His voice was flat. "And he knows it's not enough. But he's got the backing of the county commissioner, which means if he decides to make a claim that my deed has irregularities, he can make my life very difficult for a very long time, whether or not he's right." Abigail set down her fork. "Does your deed have irregularities?" "No." Then it doesn't matter as much as it ought to." He set down his cup. "The law here works the way money tells it to work. Briggs has money. I have a forge and 12 acres. She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." He said it like a man admitting something that cost him something to admit. "I filed the deed myself 8 years ago. I know what it says. but I've got nobody to stand behind me legally if Briggs decides to push." Abigail thought for a moment. "Do you know Judge Alderman in Billings?" Nathan looked at her. "I know who he is." "He's honest," she said. "The family I worked for in Billings, Mr. Denton, was on the circuit court. He used to talk about Alderman. Said he was the one judge in the district who couldn't be bought because he didn't need the money." She paused. "If Briggs moves against you, you want someone like Alderman in your corner before it happens. Not after." Nathan was very quiet. "You learned about circuit courts from a family you housekept for." "I paid attention," she said simply. He looked at her across the table. The fire was low, and the room was warm, and outside the wind had picked up and was working its way around the corners of the house. He looked at her, the way he sometimes looked at things he was trying to understand, careful, unhurried, like a man taking the true measure of something he had initially underestimated. "I'll write to Alderman," he said. "Good," she said. She cleared the dishes. He sat by the fire. But tonight he did not sit in the usual silence. Tonight she could feel him thinking. From across the room, could feel the weight of it, and she moved quietly, so as not to disturb it, because she had learned that Nathan Cole's thinking was one of the most productive things she had ever had the privilege of being in the presence of, even when she wasn't supposed to know it was happening. He wrote the letter to Alderman the next morning before he left for the forge. He left it on the kitchen table. She found it there when she came in to start breakfast, already sealed and addressed, and beside it he had left $2 silver and a small note that said, "Post Office." "Thank you." She stood at the table for a moment with the letter in her hand and the note in her hand, and felt something move through her chest that she had not felt in a very long time, and had no good name for, and then she put on her coat and took the letter to the post office and came home and made breakfast, and that was all she let herself do with it. November passed into December, the way seasons change in Montana, which is to say, without apology and with considerable wind. The farmhouse grew colder in the mornings, and Abigail woke earlier to bank the fire. Before Nathan rose, and she noticed that he had, without saying anything about it, begun leaving extra wood stacked inside the back door, so she would not have to go out in the cold to get it. She did not mention this. He did not mention this. They both knew it had happened. The town had its opinion, and its opinion had settled. She could feel it when she went to the general store in the way conversations paused when she entered, and resumed differently when she left. She could feel it in the way the man at the counter she had learned his name was Phillips, sometimes let his eyes drift from her face downward, assessingly, and back up again. She could feel it in the way that certain women of the town looked at her with a particular careful pity that was somehow more insulting than open contempt, because at least contempt was honest. She mentioned none of this to Nathan. She mentioned none of it to anyone except Mabel Hurst, who had become, over the course of 6 Sunday services and 3 Thursday afternoons, something close to a friend, or the nearest thing to a friend that Abigail had allowed herself in a very long time. "They're saying you've got designs on the house," Mabel told her one Thursday afternoon, with the blunt directness of a woman who had decided Abigail could handle the truth. "Clara's been making sure of it. She told Mrs. Pruitt that she worries about Nathan being taken advantage of by a woman with no connections and no prospects." Abigail looked at her tea. "What do you say when she says that?" "I say that a woman who has kept Nathan Cole's house running smoothly for 2 months has demonstrated more genuine capability than anyone who's ever set her sights on that house from the outside." Mabel set down her cup firmly. "And then I say that it's not Clara Finch's house and never will be." "She'll cause trouble," Abigail said. "She already is," Mabel agreed. "The question is whether it matters." She looked at Abigail steadily. "Does it matter to you what they're saying?" Abigail considered this question honestly. "It matters what Nathan thinks," she said carefully. Mabel smiled, just slightly. "Yes," she said. "I thought it might." Abigail looked at her. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said a word." "You were about to." Mabel was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He came to the church last Sunday." Abigail went very still. "What?" "Stood in the back. Left before the final hymn, same as always." But he came. Mabel looked at her with an expression that said everything and nothing at the same time. He hasn't done that in 6 years, Abigail. 6 years. The room was very quiet. That's nothing to do with me, Abigail said. No, Mabel said agreeably. Of course not. She said it exactly the way a person says something they do not believe at all. That evening, Abigail came home to find Nathan already there an hour earlier than usual, sitting at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper and a pen, and an expression of concentrated effort that told her he was writing something difficult. He looked up when she came in. Alderman wrote back, he said. She took off her coat. What did he say? He knows Briggs. Nathan set down the pen. Says he's been watching him work the eastern counties for 2 years. Says if Briggs makes a move against my deed, I'm to wire him immediately, and he'll come himself. A pause. He also said, and this is the part I don't know what to do with, he said there are 4 other landowners along the eastern line who've already had visits from Briggs, and that if all 5 of us file a joint complaint with the district court, Briggs loses his operating license. Abigail looked at him. Do you know the other 4? 2 of them. Bill Garrett and old Pete Sorley. He was quiet. I'm not a man who asks for things, he said slowly. I know, she said. But if what Alderman's saying is right, you have to ask, she said. He looked at her. You make it sound simple. It isn't simple, but it's necessary. And you know the difference between things that are hard and things that can't be done. She met his gaze squarely. Go talk to Garrett and Sorley. Tell them what Alderman told you. Let them decide for themselves. Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded, once the way a man nods when he has made a decision he is not entirely comfortable with, but knows is right. I'll go tomorrow, he said. He went the next morning. He was back by noon. He came through the door, and she was folding laundry at the kitchen table, and he said without preamble, Garrett says yes. Sorley says he needs to think. Give Sorley time, she said. I did. He poured himself coffee. Garrett told me something else. He said Briggs has been spending evenings at the saloon, talking to people, specifically asking questions about me. Abigail's hands went still on the laundry. What kind of questions? She asked. Nathan looked at her. His voice was level, but his jaw was tight. About the house. About who lives here. About you. The kitchen was very quiet. He's looking for something to use, Abigail said. That's my read. He set down his cup. I want you to know that anything he finds or thinks he finds is not going to change anything. Not from my side. She looked at him, really looked at him. At the set of his jaw, and the steadiness in his gray-green eyes, and the way he was standing in his own kitchen with his coffee cup, and his particular brand of quiet, determined honesty. Mr. Cole, she said carefully. What are you saying? He looked back at her with equal steadiness. I'm saying that whatever Tom Briggs tells this town about you, or about this house, or about the 2 of us living here together, my position doesn't change. You are employed in this house. You are doing your work. And anyone who makes that into something it isn't is going to have to take that up with me directly. She held his gaze. Something moved through her chest that she could not name and did not try to. All right, she said quietly. All right, he said. He went back to the forge. She went back to the laundry, and she pressed her hands flat against the folded cloth and breathed very slowly, and told herself that what she was feeling was gratitude. She was not entirely wrong about that, but she was not entirely right either, and in the part of herself that had stopped pretending she knew it. Tom Briggs came to the forge on a Wednesday. Nathan told her about it that evening, the way he told her most things directly, without decoration, sitting across the dinner table, with his hands wrapped around his coffee cup and his eyes on her face. He came in just after noon, Nathan said. Stood in the doorway like he owned the ground under it. Said he wanted to have a friendly conversation. Was it friendly? Abigail asked. No. She waited. He told me his offer on the property was still open. Said he'd give me until the 1st of January to consider it, and that after January he couldn't guarantee the terms would stay the same. Nathan set down his cup. Then he told me he'd heard I had a woman living in the house. The table was very quiet. "What exactly did he say about that?" Abigail asked. Her voice was even. She had worked for 11 years at keeping her voice even. "He said he'd heard some talk. That a widow he called you a widow, which you've never told me you are." "I'm not," she said. "I know that." He said a woman of uncertain background had taken up residence, and that certain people in town were concerned about the propriety of the arrangement. Nathan's jaw tightened. He said it in the particular way a man says something when he wants you to understand he's holding it like a card. "He's going to use it," Abigail said. "He's going to try." Nathan looked at her steadily. "I want you to be prepared for that." She looked back at him with the same steadiness. "I've been prepared for worse than Tom Briggs," she said. He believed her. She could see that he believed her. But there was something else in his face, something she had learned to read over the past 2 months, a tightening around the eyes that meant he was angry in the particular controlled way of men who have taught themselves not to show it. "He said one more thing," Nathan said. "Tell me." "He said the smartest thing I could do for the property and for my reputation was to sell the land, and he used the phrase, 'regularize my domestic situation,' which I took to mean, get rid of you and invite Clara Finch to take the position she's been angling for." Abigail was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What did you tell him?" Nathan picked up his cup. "I told him to get off my property before I helped him off it." Something happened in her chest. She managed to keep it off her face, but only barely. "Good," she said. "He'll come back." "I know. And it'll be worse next time. He'll have done something between now and then, talked to the commissioner, talked to a lawyer, dug up whatever he thinks he can use." Nathan looked at her. Abigail. It was the first time he had used her given name. They both registered it in the same moment. He did not take it back. "I need to know if you want to leave," he said. "Before this gets difficult, I need you to tell me honestly, because I won't ask you to stay in a situation that becomes harder than it's worth for you. Whatever Briggs does, it'll be aimed at me, but it'll land on you too. That's not fair to you." She looked at him across the table. At the man who had built his own house board by board for a woman who died before she could live in it. At the man who sat by the fire for 20 minutes every evening, not reading, not sleeping, just existing. In a silence he had gotten very good at being alone inside. At the man who had stacked wood inside the back door without saying a word about it. "Nathan," she said. The name felt strange in her mouth. Careful, like something she was trying the weight of. He looked at her. "I'm not leaving," she said. The silence that followed was different from their usual silence. It was the kind of silence that had shape to it, that meant something that both of them understood, and neither of them named. "All right," he said finally. "All right," she said. She cleared the dishes. He sat by the fire. But tonight, he did not sit for 20 minutes. Tonight, he sat for almost an hour, and she could feel from her room through the wall the quality of his thinking. She lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, and understood that something had shifted between them quietly and without ceremony, the way the most significant shifts tend to happen. She also understood that Tom Briggs was not finished. She was right about that. He moved faster than she'd expected. By Friday, 2 days after his visit to the forge, the talk in town had taken on a different character. She felt it the moment she walked into the general store. Phillips looked at her with something new, not the usual lazy assessment, but something more specific, more pointed, the look of a man who had been given new information and was deciding what to do with it. She put her basket on the counter and gave him her list. He took it. Then he said without looking up, "Heard you've been here near 3 months now." "That's right," she said. "Long time for a housekeeper." She did not take the bait. "I suppose it depends on the house." He pulled a bag of flour from the shelf. "Tom Briggs was in here yesterday. Said he'd had a conversation with Nathan." He set the flower on the counter. Said Nathan was being stubborn about some business matters. Mr. Cole's business matters are his own concern, Abigail said. Sure. Phillips reached for the coffee beans. Just there's people in this town who've known Nathan Cole a long time, who have his interests at heart. And when a stranger comes in and... He stopped, seemed to reconsider. I'm just saying there's talk. There's always talk, Abigail said pleasantly. Is the salt pork in yet? He looked at her. She looked back at him with complete tranquility. He got the salt pork. She carried her supplies home in 2 trips, and she did not let herself think about what Phillips had said until she was back inside the farmhouse with the door closed, and then she set down her basket and stood for a moment in the kitchen and let herself think about all of it. Briggs was working through the town. That was clear. He was building something, a story, a version of events that he could use. She was part of that story. She had known from the moment Nathan told her that she would be, but knowing a thing and feeling the weight of it settle on you were different experiences entirely. She made dinner. She did not tell Nathan about Phillips. What she did tell him over dinner was, I think Briggs is talking to people. Nathan looked up. What did you hear? She told him about Phillips. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to recognize as a particular quality of his. He listened the way very few people listened, with his whole attention, not preparing his answer while she was still speaking. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Sorley came to the forge today. Old Pete Sorley. He made up his mind. He did. Something moved in Nathan's expression, not quite satisfaction, but the nearest thing to it. He's in. Which means we've got 3 of the 5. Alderman says 3 is enough to file the joint complaint, but 5 would make it stronger. Who are the other 2? Hank Mosley and a woman named Ruth Calder, widow. She runs a small horse operation about 4 miles east. He paused. I don't know her well. Abigail thought about that. Let me talk to her, she said. Nathan looked at her. You don't know her either. No, but she might talk more freely to another woman than to a man she doesn't know well. She met his gaze. Let me try. He considered this for a long moment. She could see him working through it, the part of him that didn't like asking for things warring with the part of him that had over the past months learned to recognize that Abigail Turner's judgment was worth trusting. I'll take you out there Saturday, he said. I can go alone, she said. I know you can. He looked at her steadily. I'll take you anyway. She did not argue. And in the part of herself she had stopped lying to, she was glad. Saturday morning, he had the wagon out front, before she had finished clearing the breakfast dishes. She wrapped herself in her heaviest coat and climbed up, and they drove out along the eastern road in the cold, bright December morning, not talking much the way they traveled in their particular quiet that had nothing empty about it. Ruth Calder was perhaps 60, lean and weathered in the way of women who had spent decades doing hard outdoor work and had decided somewhere along the way to stop apologizing for it. She opened her door and looked at Nathan, and then looked at Abigail with sharp gray eyes that moved over her once efficiently and arrived at a conclusion. Come in, she said. I've got coffee. They sat at Ruth Calder's kitchen table, and Ruth poured coffee without ceremony and looked at Nathan and said, You're here about Briggs? Yes, ma'am, Nathan said. He came here 2 months ago, Ruth said. Offered me half what this land is worth. I told him what he could do with his offer. She picked up her cup. What's your angle? Nathan laid it out simply. Alderman, the joint complaint. The 4 who were already in or considering it. Ruth listened with her elbows on the table and her gray eyes moving between them. When he finished, she looked at Abigail. You're his housekeeper. I am, Abigail said. Briggs been using that against him. He's trying to. Ruth made a sound in her throat that was nearly identical to the sound Mabel Hurst had made about Clara Finch, and Abigail thought that there was a particular register that women of a certain age and experience reached where their opinions no longer needed many words. I lost my husband 7 years ago, Ruth said. The number of men who tried to use that situation to move me off this land. She shook her head. You don't need to explain Tom Briggs to me. She looked at Nathan. I'll sign your complaint, but I want to see Alderman's letter first. I'll bring it Monday, Nathan said. Good. Ruth refilled his coffee without being asked, which Abigail recognized as its own form of agreement. And you, she looked at Abigail again with those sharp gray eyes. You holding up all right with the talk in town? Yes, ma'am, Abigail said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. You're tougher than you look, she said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was better than a compliment. It was an assessment from a woman who did not offer them carelessly. Most people are, Abigail said. Ruth smiled, small and brief and real. Yes, she said. They are. They drove back to town in the early afternoon. The road was cold and the sky was white and hard, and Nathan drove with his eyes forward and his hands easy on the reins, and somewhere around the halfway mark he said without looking at her, You handled that well. She's a straightforward woman, Abigail said. Straightforward is easy. Not for most people. She glanced at him. He was still looking at the road. Were you worried I'd say the wrong thing? She asked. A pause. No, he said. I was... He stopped, seemed to reconsider. I was watching her decide about you, he said finally. People decide fast out here. I was watching to see what she decided. And she decided you were worth trusting. He was quiet for a moment. She's not wrong. Abigail looked at the road ahead of them and said nothing because there were no words that were adequate to that moment, and she had enough sense to know it. They were almost back to town when she saw the horse tied outside the forge. A good horse, too good for the eastern road, too clean for working stock. She recognized it before she recognized the man standing beside it. Tom Briggs was perhaps 50, well-dressed in the way of men who wanted to look like they had earned their money, rather than arranged to take it from other people. He had a square, handsome face that had gone slightly soft at the jaw, and the particular posture of a man accustomed to being the most powerful person in any given room. He watched the wagon come down the road and did not move. Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop. Briggs looked at both of them. Let his gaze linger on Abigail for a moment, in a way designed to make a point. Cole, he said, been looking for you. I've been out, Nathan said. He did not get down from the wagon. So I see. Briggs's gaze moved back to Abigail with a small, deliberate smile. Miss Turner, isn't it I don't think we've been formally introduced? Tom Briggs. Abigail looked at him. I know who you are, she said. He smiled as though this pleased him. Good. Then you know I'm a man who likes to resolve things efficiently. He looked back at Nathan. I've been talking to the county commissioner. There are some questions about your deed filing date. Nothing serious perhaps, but the kind of thing that benefits from prompt attention. He paused. My offer still stands, Cole. I'm trying to make this easy. I know what you're trying to do, Nathan said. His voice was entirely level. And I know why you're doing it, and I've got nothing to say to you that I haven't already said. Briggs looked at him for a moment, then at Abigail, then back at Nathan with something behind his eyes that was not quite a threat, but was shaped like one. I hope you're keeping good records, Briggs said pleasantly. Of everything. He untied his horse. For your sake, and for T's, a glance at Abigail, everyone involved. He mounted and rode. Nathan watched him go without moving. Then he climbed down from the wagon and helped Abigail down with one hand, brief, practical, the way he did everything, and stood for a moment in the cold air. He knows we went to see someone today, Nathan said. He was watching. Abigail agreed. Or someone in town told him. Phillips, Nathan said. She said nothing. He looked at her. You thought so too, he said. Yesterday at the store, she said. Yes, you didn't tell me. I didn't want to worry you before I was certain. He looked at her for a long time. Something moved in his expression that she could not entirely name. Don't do that, he said quietly. Don't protect me from things. I'd rather know. She held his gaze. All right, she said. Then you should know he's going to move before Christmas. Whatever he's planning, he'll want it done before aldermen can get involved. Which means we have less time than I thought." Nathan was quiet. Then he said, "How do you know that?" "Because it's what I would do," she said, "if I were him." He looked at her with that expression that she had learned meant he was remeasuring something. Like a man who had thought he understood the dimensions of a thing and kept finding it was larger than he'd calculated. "I'll wire aldermen tonight," he said. "Good," she said. They went inside. She made dinner. He drafted the wire to aldermen at the kitchen table, while she cooked, reading sentences aloud occasionally and asking if they said clearly what he meant them to say. She told him honestly when they did, and honestly when they didn't, and he rewrote the parts that didn't without argument or pride, which was one of the things she had come to understand was one of his finest qualities. He was never too proud to be helped. After dinner, he went to the telegraph office. He came back 40 minutes later and stood in the doorway of the main room where she was mending by the fire. "Sent," he said. "Good." He came in and sat in his chair. She went on mending. The fire was low and warm, and the wind had settled, and the house was quiet, in the way it was quiet on the best evenings, when the quiet itself felt like a kind of company. After a while he said, "Margaret used to sit right where you're sitting." She went completely still. Her hands stopped on the mending. He was looking at the fire. His voice was level the way it always was, but there was something underneath it that she had never heard there before, something old and carefully kept that he had apparently decided tonight to take out. "She'd sit there and read," he said. "She was always reading something. I used to tease her about it, said she was going to ruin her eyes." A pause. She'd been sitting there the last evening she came to supper. 3 months before the wedding. She looked fine. She looked perfectly fine. His jaw tightened. She was dead in 6 weeks. Abigail said nothing. She waited. "I hired the first housekeeper because I thought having someone in the house would make the house feel less—" He stopped, started again. "I thought it would help. It didn't. The second one was the same. The third was—" He shook his head. "I don't know what I thought the third one was going to be. I just knew I couldn't keep coming home to nothing." "Nathan," she said softly. He looked at her. The firelight was low, and it caught the angles of his face, and she could see for the first time all the years of it. The 6 years of maintained rooms and bare mantelpieces, and 20 minutes alone by the fire every night, just existing in a silence he had slowly, painfully learned to survive. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. It came out plainly without self-pity, just the honesty of a man who had decided to tell the truth about something difficult. "I don't know what this is. What—" He stopped, looked at the fire. "What we're doing here." She held his gaze steadily. "I don't know either," she said honestly. He looked at her. "But you're staying." "I'm staying. Even with Briggs." "Even with Briggs." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Why?" She thought about that. The real answer. Not the easy answer, not the practical one, not the one about the job and the wage and the position. The real one. "Because this is the first house I've been in," she said slowly, "where someone left wood stacked inside the door so I wouldn't have to go out in the cold, and didn't say a word about it." She paused. "And I don't think a person walks away from that." The fire crackled. Nathan looked at her. His gray-green eyes were very quiet and very clear, and in them she could see something that had not been there 3 months ago, when he had opened the door and looked at her with his careful, measuring gaze. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She went to bed. He sat by the fire longer than usual. She lay in the dark and pressed her hand flat against her chest over her heart, which was doing something she had no good name for. And she told herself that whatever this was, whatever was happening in this house, between these two people who had both arrived at their lives, carrying the weight of everything they'd lost, and never spoken about whatever it was real. She had spent 11 years working in other people's houses. She knew the difference between a place you slept and a place that held you. This house had started holding her. She was still working through what that meant when she heard it. A sound from outside. Not wind, not the usual settling of the wood, something deliberate. She sat up in her bed. The sound came again, and then she smelled it. Smoke. She was out of bed and through the door before she had consciously decided to move. And the moment she came into the main room, she could see it, not inside, not yet, but through the front window. The particular orange quality of light that was not lamplight and was not moonlight, and that she recognized from a fire that had taken the barn behind the Denton house in Billings when she was 24 years old. "Nathan?" She crossed to his bedroom door and knocked hard. "Nathan, get up, now." He was through the door in seconds, already awake, already reading her face. What? Outside, the east side of the forge. He moved past her and hit the front door, and she was right behind him. The cold hit her bare feet on the porch boards. The forge shed beside the house had a line of fire running along its base on the eastern wall, not large yet, not out of control, but deliberate. The kind of fire that someone had set. Nathan was already moving, already pulling the water barrel that stood near the forge door, and she ran back inside and came back with the kitchen pail, and they worked together in the dark and the cold, wordless and efficient, the way two people work when they have lived in the same house long enough to move around each other without thinking. It took 20 minutes to bring it fully down. When it was out, they stood in the cold together, breathing hard. Nathan's hands were black and Abigail's feet were numb, and the eastern wall of the forge had a long, scorched line along its base, but was standing. Nathan crouched and looked at the base of the burned line, straightened. His voice when he spoke was very quiet and very controlled. "Someone laid it," he said. "This isn't an accident." She already knew that. "Briggs," she said, "or someone working for him." He stood in the cold dark and looked at the forge, and she could feel the anger in him. Not hot, not explosive, but deep and cold and absolute, the kind that doesn't break things, the kind that decides things. "Nathan," she said. He turned. "Wire Alderman again in the morning," she said. "Tell him what happened. Tell him we need him here before Christmas." He looked at her, standing in the cold in her nightclothes with her feet bare on the frozen ground, her hair loose, her face lit by what remained of the ember glow from the forge wall. She did not look like a woman who was frightened. She looked like a woman who had made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion and was ready to act on it. "Tell him tonight," Nathan said. "The telegraph office is closed." "I'll open it," he said it flatly, with complete intention. She looked at him. "All right," she said. "Go, I'll wait here." He went for his boots and coat. She wrapped herself in the blanket from her bed and stood on the porch in the cold dark and watched the ember line on the forge wall. And she was not afraid. She was something harder than afraid. She was decided. Tom Briggs had made a mistake tonight. He had done what men like him always did when they wanted to frighten someone. He had shown exactly how far he was willing to go. And what he had not understood, what men like him never understood, was that showing a woman who had survived 11 years of being dismissed and overlooked and quietly discarded exactly how much he was willing to do, that was not frightening. That was a line being drawn. And Abigail Turner had never in her life been the kind of woman who stayed on the wrong side of a line once it was drawn. Nathan came back in 12 minutes with his coat and his boots, and the particular expression of a man who had made up his mind about something permanent. He stopped at the porch. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock the door." "Be careful," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "I'll be back." "I know," she said. She watched him go down the dark road toward town, and she stood on the porch in the blanket until she could no longer hear his footsteps. Then she went inside and put 2 more logs on the fire and sat in the chair by the fireplace, the one he always sat in, the one Margaret had sat in before him, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she thought very clearly and very calmly about what came next. She was still sitting there when he came back an hour later. He came through the door and looked at her sitting in his chair, in her blanket in the firelight. and something moved across his face that she felt in the part of her chest where she kept the things she had no good words for. "Alderman's been wired," he said. "Good," she said. "He'll be here by Thursday." She nodded. Nathan stood in the middle of his own main room and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and between them the fire burned low and warm, and the house that had been maintained without being loved for 6 years held both of them in its particular silence. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I will be," he said. She got up from his chair. She went to her room. She lay in the dark with her hand flat against her chest, and she listened to him bank the fire and move through the house, checking the front door, the back door, the window latches. And then the house went quiet. She did not sleep for a long time. But she was not afraid. She was certain, which was something she had not been in a very long time, and it felt in the dark like solid ground under her feet. Whatever Tom Briggs thought he had started tonight, he had miscalculated badly. Because the woman in the spare room of Nathan Cole's farmhouse was not a woman who could be frightened into leaving. And the man who had just walked back through the dark to be certain she was safe was not a man who would let her face any of it alone. Judge Alderman arrived on Thursday as promised. Abigail heard the stage before she saw it, and she was standing on the porch with her coat on and her arms crossed against the cold when Nathan came up the road from the forge to meet it. The judge who stepped down was not what she had pictured from Mr. Denton's descriptions. She had imagined someone older, more formal, more contained. Alderman was perhaps 65, broad through the chest, with a white beard and the kind of eyes that had spent decades looking at people who were lying and had gotten very good at knowing it immediately. He shook Nathan's hand. Then he looked at Abigail. "Miss Turner," he said. He said it the way a man says a name when he already knows everything attached to it. "Arthur Denton spoke highly of you." She looked at him. "You know Mr. Denton. We were on the circuit court together for 6 years." He came up the porch steps. "He wrote to me last week. Said if anyone in Montana had the good sense to put together a case against Tom Briggs, it would be the woman who used to sit at his kitchen table asking questions about property law." Abigail stared at him. Nathan looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Something between surprise and the particular satisfaction of a man discovering that someone he already respected had additional depths he hadn't accounted for. "You wrote to Denton," Nathan said. It was not quite a question. "I wrote to him 2 weeks ago," she said. "After Briggs came to the forge the first time. I thought it was worth having someone in our corner who knew Alderman personally." She looked at the judge. "I didn't know he'd write to you directly." "He didn't just write," Alderman said. He was almost smiling. "He sent affidavits, 3 of them, documenting 2 prior cases where Briggs used the same strategy in Yellowstone County. Cases that were settled quietly and never made it to district court." He patted his coat pocket. "I've got them right here." Nathan was very quiet for a moment. Then he turned and looked at Abigail with an expression she felt all the way down. "Come inside," she said to both of them. "There's coffee." They sat at the kitchen table, Nathan Alderman and Abigail, and spent 3 hours going through everything. Alderman laid out the Denton affidavits. Nathan produced his deed and every letter he had received from Briggs. Abigail produced from her own room a small leather notebook in which she had written in her precise, careful hand every date, every conversation, every incident, including the night of the fire written down, the morning after, while the details were still sharp and exact. Alderman looked at the notebook. "You kept records," he said. "From the beginning," she said. He looked at Nathan. "Marry this woman," he said. Nathan looked at the table. Abigail looked at her coffee cup. Neither of them said anything, and the silence was so specific and so full that Alderman cleared his throat and went back to the documents. By the time they finished, the plan was clear. Alderman would file the joint complaint with the district court in Helena on Monday with the signatures of all 5 landowners, Nathan Garrett Sorley, Ruth Calder, and Hank Mosley, who had finally sent his agreement by post 2 days prior. The Denton affidavits established a pattern of behavior. The fire documented in Abigail's notebook and witnessed by both Nathan and herself added criminal conduct to what had been a civil matter. Alderman said that last piece delivered flatly with the particular weight of a man who had been waiting for exactly that kind of evidence. Briggs will know you've filed the moment the telegraph wires it, Alderman said. He'll move fast. He may try to approach one of your 5 to break the coalition. He looked at Nathan. Who's your weakest link? Sorely, Nathan said without hesitation. He's in, but he's scared. He's been in Red Creek 30 years and he doesn't like making enemies. Then someone should be with Sorley before Monday, Alderman said. He looked at Abigail. She nodded. I'll go tomorrow. I'll take you, Nathan said. You need to be at the forge, she said. Briggs will notice if you close up. I'll take the wagon myself. Nathan looked at her. She looked back. He said nothing, which was his version of agreement. Alderman stayed at the church with the Hursts that night. Nathan walked him there after supper and came back to find Abigail at the kitchen table with her notebook open, going back through every entry from the beginning. He stood in the doorway for a moment. You wrote to Denton before you told me anything about it, he said. She looked up. Yes. While you were also managing the house and cooking meals and dealing with Clara Finch. And keeping records, she said. Yes. He came in and sat down across from her. He looked at the notebook, the pages of her careful writing, dates and names and exact words recorded with the precision of someone who had understood from the beginning that precision would matter. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Because I wasn't certain it would work, she said. I didn't want to give you hope about something I wasn't sure of. And because... She stopped, looked at him honestly. Because you already had enough to carry. He was quiet for a moment. I don't need protecting, he said. It was almost exactly what he had said to her before, don't protect me from things, but this time it was softer. Less instruction, more asking. I know, she said. It wasn't protection, it was... She searched for the word. It was something I could do, so I did it. He looked at her across the table. You've been doing things like this since the beginning, he said slowly. Things I didn't ask for, and didn't know about until after. The shirt, the pantry, the letter to Denton. He paused. Why? She held his gaze. Because this house needed doing, she said quietly. And so did you. The table was very quiet. Nathan looked at her for a long time. The way he looked at things he was trying to understand. Taking the true measure. Only this time she had the sense that he already understood and was looking anyway because some things deserved to be looked at. Abigail, he said. Don't, she said gently. Not tonight. There's too much happening tonight. He closed his mouth, nodded once, got up and went to bed. She sat at the table for a while longer with her notebook and the fire and the familiar quiet of his house around her, and she pressed her hand flat over her heart and told herself firmly that there would be a right time for whatever that conversation was, and tonight was not it. She went to Pete Sorley's the next morning alone. He answered the door in his work clothes, with flour on his hands, and the expression of a man who had not been sleeping well. He was 70 if he was a day, with a thick white mustache and the bowed legs of someone who had spent 40 years on horseback. He looked at her and said, Miss Turner, didn't expect you. I know, she said. May I come in? He stepped back. She came in. His house was the house of a man who had lived alone a very long time and had stopped noticing what it looked like. She sat at his table, and he sat across from her, and she did not waste either of their time. I know you're afraid, she said. He looked at her. I ain't, Mr. Sorley. She said it quietly without challenge. I'm not here to judge that. I'm here because Nathan needs you to hold on through Monday, just until Alderman files. After that, the complaint is in the court's hands, and Briggs can't touch any of you without it becoming obstruction. Sorley turned his coffee cup in both hands. Briggs came by Wednesday, he said. Evening. She went very still. What did he say? Said he knew I'd agreed to join Nathan's complaint. Said he respected that. Said he also wanted me to know that the mortgage on this property runs through the First Territorial Bank in Helena and that he has a personal relationship with the bank director. Sorley's jaw tightened. Said it real friendly. Like it was just information. She kept her voice steady. He was threatening your mortgage. He was suggesting, Sorley said bitterly. Real politely. Does Nathan know? Not yet. Sorley looked at her. I was going to send word today, but then you showed up. He was quiet. I'm 71 years old, Miss Turner. I've got no family left in this county. If I lose this property, you won't, she said. Not if we do this right. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Sorley, Alderman already has affidavits showing. Briggs did the same thing in Yellowstone County, threatened mortgages, threatened credit, used financial pressure to force sales. That is bank fraud. If Alderman adds what Briggs just said to you to the complaint, Briggs doesn't just lose his operating license. He faces criminal charges. She paused. But only if you tell Alderman exactly what Briggs said. Exact words. Do you remember them? Sorley looked at her for a long moment. Word for word, he said. Then write them down, she said. Today, and I'll take them to Alderman myself before tonight. Something shifted in Pete Sorley's face. The fear didn't go away. She didn't expect it to go away, but something firmer settled underneath it, the way bedrock settles under moving water. All right, he said. He wrote it down. She waited at his table while he wrote in his slow, careful hand, and when he passed her the paper, she folded it and put it in her coat pocket and stood up. Mr. Sorley, she said, you've been on this land 30 years. Don't let one bad man take it in 30 days. He looked up at her. You're a remarkable woman, he said, not flirtatiously, not condescendingly, just honestly the way old men sometimes say true things because they've stopped having time for anything else. I'm a woman who's been backed into a corner enough times to know how to fight from one, she said. That's all. He smiled. For the first time since she'd arrived, he actually smiled. She drove back to town. She went directly to the church and gave Alderman Sorley's paper and watched his expression change as he read it. He looked up when he finished. This is exactly what I needed, he said. I know, she said. How did you know Briggs would go after Sorley specifically? Because Sorley was the one who took longest to decide, she said. Men like Briggs look for hesitation the way water looks for cracks. Once they find one, they push. She stood up. File Monday. File everything. I intend to, Alderman said. He looked at her with the same expression Nathan had been wearing for weeks, the expression of someone recalibrating. Nathan Cole is a lucky man, Miss Turner. He's a good man, she said. That's different from lucky. She drove home. Nathan was already back from the forge when she came in. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and he had the look of someone who had been sitting there a while thinking. He looked up the moment she came through the door. Well, he said. She told him. Everything Briggs's visit to Sorley. The mortgage threat. Sorley's written account. Alderman's response. She watched Nathan's face move through several things as she talked. By the end, his jaw was set in the way she had come to associate with the cold, deep anger that didn't break things. He threatened Pete Sorley's mortgage, he said. Flat, quiet, final. Yes. He went to a 71-year-old man who's been on his land 30 years and threatened his mortgage. Yes. Nathan stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she could see it moving through him, the anger, the restraint, the calculation. He was not a man who acted on impulse. Whatever he did next would be something he had fully decided on. He turned around. I'm going to talk to Hank Mosley tonight, he said. Make sure he knows what Briggs is doing. If Briggs went to Sorley, he may go to Mosley next. Do you want me to come? No. He held her gaze. I need you to stay here. If Briggs or anyone working for him comes while I'm out, I don't want the house empty. She looked at him. You think he'd come here? I think he already did, Nathan said. The night of the fire. The room was very quiet. All right, she said. I'll stay. He left. She locked the door and banked the fire and sat at the kitchen table with her notebook and a lamp, and she was not afraid. She was watchful, which was different. He came back at 9 o'clock. He came through the door and she looked at his face and knew something had happened. What? She said. Mosley's out, Nathan said. He sat down heavily. Briggs got to him. He won't say exactly what was said, but he's out. He sent his apologies. His voice was controlled, careful, the voice of a man managing something. We're down to 4. She thought for a moment. Alderman said 3 was enough. 3 is enough to file, 4 is better. But Mosley was our most credible additional witness. He's been here 20 years, he's on the town council, people listen to him. Nathan looked at her. Without Mosley Briggs's people, we'll say it's a handful of stubborn holdouts with a grudge. 4 people is easier to dismiss than 5. She was quiet for a moment. Then, who in this town does Briggs not have a hold on? Nathan looked at her. Think, she said. Who owes him nothing? Who has standing, real standing, the kind people listen to, and who has watched what he's done? Nathan was quiet. Mabel Hurst, he said slowly. Mabel's a preacher's wife, Abigail said. That's standing. But she's not a property owner on the Eastern Line. No, but... Nathan stopped. Her husband is. The church owns a parcel out east. Been there since the town was founded. Briggs never approached them because it's church land, and he didn't want the optics. He looked at Abigail. But if Hurst came forward as a character witness, not as part of the complaint, just testified to what he's observed in this town over 20 years. That's different from a 5th signature, Abigail said. That's better than a 5th signature. She stood up. I'll talk to Mabel in the morning. It's her husband who'd have to testify. I know, but it's Mabel who'll convince him. She looked at Nathan. She already knows most of this. I've been talking to her for 2 months. Nathan stared at her. You've been talking to Mabel, she said. Yes, I told you she's been a friend. You told her about Briggs. I told her what was happening in this town, which she is part of. And she is not a woman who looks the other way when something wrong is happening in her town. Abigail looked at him steadily. That's the difference between Mabel Hurst and Hank Mosley. Briggs can threaten Mosley's business interests. He cannot threaten Reverend Hurst's conscience. Nathan sat back. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly, When did you become the general of this operation? She looked at him, carefully. Someone had to be, she said. Something happened in his face. It moved through too fast for her to name all of it, but what settled at the end was something open and certain and direct, the way his face was when he had made up his mind about something he intended to keep. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Just briefly. Just one moment. His hand was large and rough and warm, and he held hers for exactly as long as it took to communicate something that neither of them had said out loud yet. Then he let go. Stood up. Get some sleep, he said. You've got a hard day tomorrow. She looked at her hand. Good night, Nathan, she said. Good night, Abigail, he said. He went to bed. She sat at the table for a while longer and looked at the place on the back of her hand where his had been and understood with the quiet certainty of someone who has spent a long time being honest with herself that she had crossed a line some time ago from which she had no interest in returning. Mabel Hurst said yes before Abigail had finished explaining. They were sitting in Mabel's parlor on Saturday morning, and Mabel listened to the whole of it with her hands folded and her gray eyes steady, and when Abigail finished, Mabel said, James has been wanting to say something about Briggs for a year. I've been the one holding him back because I didn't think we had enough. Now we do. She stood up. I'll send for him right now. He's at the church. He can be at Alderman's by noon. Mabel, don't thank me. Mabel looked at her with those clear, steady eyes. Thank me by not leaving this town. because Nathan Cole has been half a person for 6 years, and you are the reason he walked into that church last Sunday, and I will not stand by and watch Tom Briggs take that apart." Abigail looked at her. "He went again," Mabel said quietly. "This Sunday, too. Sat in the same back pew. Stayed for the final hymn." She had not known that. She had not seen it on his face. He had said nothing. "He stayed for the hymn," she repeated. "He did." Mabel's voice was gentle. "The last time he stayed for the final hymn was the Sunday before Margaret died." The room was very quiet. She walked home from Mabel's house, and she went straight to the spare room, and she sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and she pressed her hands together and breathed slowly for a while. Because it was one thing to know something in the steady, practical part of yourself that managed feelings carefully. It was another thing entirely to learn that the man you had been trying not to love had been walking into a church alone for 2 Sundays in a row and staying for the hymns he had not stayed for in 6 years. She sat until the feeling settled into something she could carry. Then she got up and made lunch. Nathan came home at noon to eat, which he had not done before 2 months ago and now did every day. He sat down and she put food on the table and he said, "Reverend Hurst came to the forge this morning." She looked at him. "He wanted to tell me himself," Nathan said, "before Alderman talked to him formally." He looked at her. His face was carefully still. "He also told me you'd been talking to Mabel for 2 months, about all of it." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not asking you to." He looked at his plate. "I'm asking—" He stopped, started again, the way he did when he'd arrived at the edge of something. "I'm asking how you did all of this. The Denton letter, the Sorley visit, Mabel, all of it quietly while I wasn't watching." He looked up. "How does a person do all of that and not say a word about it?" She was quiet for a moment. "I spent 11 years in houses where I was invisible," she said. "I learned to work in the space between what people notice and what they don't. If you're invisible long enough, you learn to use it." She paused. "I didn't want to use it against you. I wanted to use it for you." He looked at her across the table. His gray-green eyes were very still and very clear. "I see you," he said, very quietly. "I want you to know that. I've seen you since the first morning." She could not speak for a moment. She looked at her hands. "I know," she said finally, equally quiet. They ate lunch in their particular silence, but it was different now. It had changed quality. It was the silence of 2 people who had said the necessary true things, and were now sitting in the space those true things had opened up, not afraid of it, just present in it. Monday came. Alderman filed the complaint in Helena by telegraph at 8 in the morning. By 9, the wire had gone to the district court. By 10, Nathan had received word at the forge that Tom Briggs's attorney had been contacted by the court. By noon, the town of Red Creek knew what had happened. Abigail was in the general store when it broke. She was standing at Phillips's counter with her list when she heard 2 men at the back of the store, and she heard Briggs's name, and she heard the word complaint, and she watched Phillips's face change as the information reached him. He looked at her. She looked back at him with complete composure and said, "Did the salt pork come in?" He stared at her for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, it came in Friday." "Good," she said. "I'll take 2 pounds." He got her 2 pounds of salt pork. His hands were not entirely steady. She walked home. Nathan was already there when she came in, had clearly been there a while, had clearly heard. He was standing in the middle of the main room, and when she came through the door, he turned and looked at her, and he was smiling. It was the first time she had seen him smile fully without anything held back, and it changed his face entirely, made him look younger, made him look like a man who had somewhere in the last several months remembered what it felt like to have something to be glad about. "It's done," she said. "Alderman wired 20 minutes ago," he said. "The complaint is filed. All 4 signatures plus Hurst's testimony. Briggs's attorney is already petitioning to dismiss, which Alderman says means Briggs knows he's in trouble." The smile settled into something steadier, something deeply relieved. "The land is safe." She set her basket on the table and let out a breath she had been holding, she realized, for a very long time. "Good," she said. He crossed the room and stood in front of her. Close. Closer than he usually stood. He was not a man who invaded space, who crowded people, who used his size to make a point. But he was standing close now in the particular way of a person who has decided that distance is no longer the right choice. "Abigail," he said. She looked up at him. "This house," he said. He seemed to be choosing words with great care. "This house has been different since you came. Not because it's cleaner, not because the meals are better." He paused. "I come home every evening and there's—" He stopped. "I come home and it's not empty. And I didn't understand until recently how much I'd gotten used to empty, how much I'd decided empty was all there was going to be." He looked at her steadily. "You changed that. I need you to know I understand that it was you that changed it. Not the clean floors, not the warm meals. You." She was very still. "Nathan?" she said carefully. "I'm not asking anything," he said quickly. I know there's things that need more time. I know this is—" He stopped, breathed. "I just needed to say it. I needed you to know that I see exactly what you did in this house, and exactly what you did for me." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had built his own house with his own hands and had a bare mantelpiece for 6 years and had started going back to church in the back pew when nobody was watching. "I know you see it," she said softly. "I've known for a while." He looked at her. "Have you?" "You stacked wood inside the door," she said. "In November, without saying a word." Something crossed his face, something warm and a little undone. "That was nothing," he said. "No," she said. "It wasn't." They stood in the middle of his main room and looked at each other, and between them was everything that had been said and everything that hadn't, and the fire and the months and the particular quiet that was theirs, and had been theirs for long enough to mean something real. "Stay," he said. It was one word, just one. "I'm staying," she said. He reached out and took her hand again, the way he had at the kitchen table, just briefly. Just the warm, steady weight of it. And this time, he didn't let go immediately. This time he held on, and she let him. He held her hand for exactly long enough that letting go felt like a choice they both made together. Then Nathan stepped back. Not away, just back. The way a man steps back when he wants to look at something properly, the way he had looked at everything since she had known him, with that careful, unhurried attention that said, "I am not going to rush this. I am not going to get this wrong. There's something I need to do tomorrow," he said. She waited. "I need to go to the forge early, before anything else." He looked at her with the particular steadiness that she had learned meant he was committed to something he had already fully decided. "There's work I've been putting off, personal work, nothing that pays." She did not ask. She had learned when to ask, and when to let a man come to the thing in his own time. "All right," she said. He nodded. Went to bed. She stood in the main room for a moment, after she heard his door close, and she looked around the house, the clean floors, the washed curtains, the mantelpiece that was still bare, but somehow no longer felt that way, the fire burning low and warm, and she understood that something had completed itself tonight. Not ended, completed. The way a circle completes when the two ends finally find each other. She went to bed. She did not lie awake. For the first time in months, she simply closed her eyes and slept. The next morning she woke at 5 as always, and came into the kitchen, and Nathan was already gone. The fire had been banked before he left, and the coffee was still warm on the stove, which meant he had left recently, which meant he had waited until almost his usual time so she would not come out to a cold kitchen. She poured herself a cup and stood at the window and drank it slowly and did not ask herself too many questions about what he was doing at the forge before dawn. She had learned to trust his silences. She made breakfast and kept it warm and went about her morning, and at 8 o'clock Mabel Hurst knocked on the door. Abigail let her in, and they sat at the kitchen table, and Mabel looked at her with those clear gray eyes and said, Well, well what? Abigail said. Don't, Mabel said. I've known Nathan Cole for 15 years. He came to James this morning before sunrise, woke him up, asked to borrow the use of the church's small anvil. She paused. James said yes without asking why, because he has known Nathan long enough to know that when that man asks for something in person before sunrise, it matters. Abigail looked at her coffee cup. He's making something, Mabel said quietly. I know, Abigail said. Do you know what? She was quiet for a moment. I think so, she said. Mabel reached across the table and put her hand over Abigail's, in the same way Abigail had seen Mabel comfort half a dozen women over the past 2 months, firmly, warmly, without sentiment, just the solid, real presence of a woman who meant it. You deserve this, Mabel said. I want you to hear that. Not from the man, not yet, but from someone who's been watching both of you. You deserve every bit of this. Abigail looked at her. She was not going to cry at Mabel's kitchen table at 8 in the morning. She had decided that. But it was a near thing. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Mabel said. Just don't be a fool and talk yourself out of it because you've spent too long believing you weren't worth staying for. Abigail looked at her sharply. Mabel looked back with complete composure. I've been watching you for 2 months, she said simply. I know what you do when something good happens. You find a practical reason it isn't as good as it looks. The kitchen was quiet. I'm working on that, Abigail said. Work faster, Mabel said pleasantly, and refilled her own coffee. Alderman came by the house at mid-morning with news. He stood at the door in his coat and looked at her with the brisk directness of a man whose time was valuable and who intended to use it well. Briggs's attorney filed a motion to dismiss in Helena this morning, he said, which I expected. The district court has scheduled a hearing for the 14th of January. Will it hold? Abigail asked. The complaint. He almost smiled. Miss Turner, between the Denton affidavit Sorley's account, the physical evidence from the fire documented in your notebook, and Reverend Hurst's testimony, Briggs would need a miracle to walk away from this clean. His attorney knows it. He paused. He may try to settle, offer to withdraw from the Eastern line, abandon his claim against Nathan's deed in exchange for the complaint being dropped. Will Nathan be asked to agree to that? His signature is on the complaint. His agreement would be required. And if he doesn't agree, Alderman looked at her steadily. Then it goes to the January hearing, and Briggs faces criminal charges in addition to losing his license. He paused. I'll be honest with you. A settlement is cleaner, faster. The outcome for the land is identical either way. But a settlement means Briggs faces no consequences. He walks away and goes to another county and does this to someone else. Abigail looked at him. Nathan will want to know all of that before he decides, she said. I know, Alderman said. That's why I'm telling you first. So that when I tell him this afternoon, you can be there to make sure he understands everything clearly. He paused. He listens to you. He listens to everyone, she said. He's just quiet about it. Alderman almost smiled again. Yes, he said, he is. Nathan came home from the forge at noon. He came through the door and looked at her, and she could see immediately that he had been working hard. There was soot on his forearms, and his jaw had the particular set of a man who has been concentrating on something intricate for a long time. He washed up at the basin and sat down, and she put lunch on the table and told him about Alderman's visit. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. A settlement means he walks, Nathan said. Yes. And does it somewhere else? Alderman said as much. Nathan looked at his hands. 4 other landowners on the Eastern line, he said. Pete Sorley, who's been on his land 30 years and got a threat against his mortgage. Ruth Calder, who's been running her horses alone since her husband died. Bill Garrett, who has 3 sons and needs that land for all of them. He paused. I'm not settling. She had known he would say that. She nodded. Tell Alderman, he said. Tell him yourself, she said. He's coming at 3. He looked at her. You told him to come at 3. I told him you'd want to hear it all before you decided, and that you'd be home at noon and back to the forge by 2, so 3 gave him time to let you think. She looked back at him steadily. Was I wrong? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, No. You were exactly right. She got up to clear the plates. He caught her hand as she reached across the table. She stopped. He held her hand the way he had the night before, that same warm, steady grip, and looked up at her with those gray-green eyes. Tonight, he said, after Alderman leaves, stay in the main room. I have something I want to show you. She held his gaze. Her heart was doing something she was not going to examine closely in the middle of the afternoon. All right, she said. He let go. She cleared the plates. He went back to the forge. Alderman arrived at 3. Nathan came back at 2:50, which she noticed and did not comment on. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had sat the first morning and the first evening, and 100 mornings and evenings between, and Nathan told Alderman clearly and without hesitation that he would not agree to a settlement. Alderman looked at him, then at Abigail, then back at Nathan. You understand this means a January court date, he said. It will be public. Briggs's attorney will work to discredit everyone involved, including people who testified on your behalf. I understand, Nathan said. It may mean Briggs retaliates between now and the 14th. Let him try, Nathan said. It was quiet, and it was flat, and it was absolute. Alderman studied him. All right, he said. He gathered his papers. I'll wire Helena this afternoon. He stood, and then he looked at Nathan with an expression that had something of respect in it. The respect of a man who has seen a great many people make the easier choice, and is somewhat surprised and considerably moved to find someone who won't. You're doing the right thing, Cole. I know, Nathan said. Alderman left. The house was quiet. Nathan sat at the table for a moment after the door closed, and then he looked at Abigail. You agree with it, he said. The decision. It was yours to make, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I agree with it. He nodded, got up. I've got 2 more hours of work to finish. I'll be back by 6. She watched him go, and then she sat at the table alone in the quiet house, and she thought about Pete Sorley and Ruth Calder, and 30 years on a piece of land, and a man who had looked Tom Briggs in the face and said no without flinching. And she thought about what it meant to choose what was right over what was easy. And she thought that she had known this about Nathan Cole, had known this essential thing about his character since the morning she had shown him the mended shirt, and he had said, "It's good work," without making a production of it. She started dinner early. He came home at 6 as promised. She had the table set and the food hot, and he washed up and sat down, and they ate in the particular quiet that was theirs. The kind that had texture and warmth and the ease of 2 people who have stopped needing to perform for each other. When the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, he said, "Come sit." She followed him into the main room. He stood by the fireplace with his back to her for a moment, and she saw him breathe in, once deliberately, the way a man breathes before he does something he has prepared for, but is not certain about. He turned around. In his hand were 2 rings, small, simple. Iron, not gold. He was a blacksmith, not a jeweler, but worked with a care and precision that was evident in every line. The metal had been smoothed and finished, and shaped so exactly that they caught the firelight, the way something made with complete attention catches light. They were the most unassuming and the most serious things she had ever seen. She could not speak. "I know this isn't—" He stopped, started again. He had clearly prepared what he wanted to say, and was now finding it inadequate, which she found in the part of herself that was still functioning entirely endearing. "I know this isn't how it's usually done," he said. "There should probably be more, I should probably have waited, or there should be more words." He looked at her. "But I'm not a man with a lot of words. And I've spent 6 years waiting for things to be right, and I've learned that waiting doesn't make things right." People do. She pressed her hand flat over her mouth. You came to this house with one canvas bag, he said. And you made it a home. Not because you cleaned it, because you saw it. You saw what it needed, and you gave it that without being asked, and without making me feel the lack of it. He paused. And you saw me. In the same way. Without asking me to be anything I wasn't. He looked at her steadily. I don't have much to offer you. I have a forge and 12 acres that some man in Helena is currently trying to take, and I have a house that needed you to become what it's supposed to be, and I have... His voice, for the first time she had ever heard, was not entirely steady. I have the certainty that I will spend whatever time is given to me being the kind of man who deserves what you've given this house, if you'll let me try. The fire crackled. The wind worked around the corners of the house the way it always did. And Abigail Turner, who had spent 11 years in other people's houses being overlooked and undervalued and moved on from who had arrived on a stranger's porch with $11 and one canvas bag and a promise to herself that she was done, expecting kindness, stood in the firelight of the house. She had made a home and looked at the man who had made her a ring with his own hands and felt for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Nathan, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Abigail, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes. Yes, she said again. And then, because she had never in her life been a woman who left the important things ambiguous, to all of it. Whatever all of it means. Yes. He crossed the room and took her hand, and slid the smaller ring onto her finger with the careful, deliberate attention he brought to everything. Every piece of ironwork, every decision, every morning he had stacked wood inside the back door without saying a word about it. And when it was on, he held her hand for a moment and looked at it and looked at her. It fits, he said, slightly surprised. You measured, she said. He looked at her. How did you know? 3 weeks ago you picked up my sewing thimble from the kitchen table, she said. You held it for about 10 seconds and set it back down. I wondered what you were doing. She looked at the ring on her finger. Now I know. Something crossed his face, undone and warm and real, and he laughed. She had heard him make the near sound of a laugh before the compressed quiet version. But she had not heard this full and genuine and slightly surprised the laugh of a man who has been found out doing something that required more tenderness than he had intended to reveal. She laughed too. They stood in the main room of his farmhouse and laughed, and the house held the sound of it the way a house holds the things it has been waiting for, and she thought that this was what Mabel had meant. Not the ring, and not the words, and not even the man, though all of those things mattered deeply. It was this, the laughing, the ease of it, the way it arrived without being invited because the space between them had finally stopped requiring careful management. Mabel came the next morning. She came at 8 as she had the morning before, knocked twice, and Abigail opened the door, and Mabel looked immediately at her left hand and then looked at her face, and her eyes went soft in a way that Abigail had not seen from her before, and Mabel said, "Oh, good," in the voice of a woman whose faith in a particular outcome had finally been confirmed. "Come in," Abigail said. "The coffee's on." The news moved through Red Creek the way news moves through small towns faster than anyone planned and differently than anyone expected. By afternoon, 3 people had come to the forge to congratulate Nathan, which Mabel later reported he had received with his characteristic quiet and exactly 1 sentence of acknowledgement. By evening, Phillips at the general store had told everyone who came in. By the next morning, Ruth Calder had driven 4 miles from her horse operation to knock on the farmhouse door and shake Abigail's hand firmly and say, "Good, you're both too stubborn to be alone." Clara Finch did not come. Abigail did not expect her to, and she found when she checked honestly that she did not mind. She had spent enough of her life managing the opinions of women who had decided what she was worth before they had taken the time to know her. Clara Finch's opinion was not something she needed. What she had not expected was Mrs. Pruitt. Mrs. Pruitt of the sour expression and the pointed question on her first visit. "How long do you intend to stay?" appeared at the door on the third day after the news had spread. Abigail opened the door and looked at her and waited. Mrs. Pruitt stood on the porch in her good coat and looked at Abigail for a moment with those assessing eyes. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." Abigail was so surprised that she almost stepped back. "I said some things the first time I came here," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Things that were unkind and were meant to be. Clara had spoken to me, and I let myself be her instrument, which I am not proud of." She looked at Abigail steadily. "You've shown more integrity in 3 months than most people show in a lifetime. I wanted to say so." Abigail looked at her. "Would you like to come in?" she said. "There's coffee." Mrs. Pruitt came in. They sat at the kitchen table. They drank coffee. It was not comfortable. It was not the ease of Mabel or the blunt warmth of Ruth Calder, but it was honest, and Abigail had always valued honesty over comfort. When Mrs. Pruitt left, she paused at the door. "Clara will come around eventually," she said. "She's proud, but she's not cruel. Not really." "I know," Abigail said. And she found that she did know, and that it did not particularly matter to her either way. She was not here to win Clara Finch's approval. She never had been. The January hearing happened exactly as Alderman had predicted. They drove to Helena together. Nathan Abigail Alderman, Pete Sorley, Ruth Calder, and Bill Garrett, and Reverend Hurst, who had insisted on coming to give his testimony in person rather than by affidavit. They were gone 4 days. They slept in a boarding house on the main street of Helena and ate breakfast together every morning at a large round table, and Abigail watched Nathan, who was not a man accustomed to sitting around a table with 5 other people, adjust to it with the determined adaptability of someone who understood that this was what the moment required. On the second day, Briggs's attorney offered a settlement for the 3rd time. On the second day, all 4 landowners refused it for the 3rd time. The district judge heard 2 days of testimony and documentation, and on the afternoon of the 4th day, delivered his ruling. Tom Briggs's claim against Nathan Cole's deed was dismissed with prejudice. His operating license in the Montana Territory was suspended pending a full investigation. The county commissioner who had backed him was referred to the territorial governor for review, and Tom Briggs as alderman quietly told Nathan outside the courthouse steps, with the cold January air coming off the mountains, was finished in this part of the country. Nathan stood on the courthouse steps and heard all of this, and nodded once with the controlled relief of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and has just set it down. Then he reached over and took Abigail's hand. She held it. They drove back to Red Creek on a clear January afternoon, with the mountains sharp against the sky, and the road frozen hard under the wagon wheels, and Pete sorely asleep against Ruth Calder's shoulder, which Ruth was pretending not to notice, and Reverend Hurst talking quietly to Bill Garrett about his sons. And Nathan drove with his eyes on the road, and his hand at some point between Helena and home, moving from the reins to cover hers where it rested on the seat between them. She looked at him. He did not look at her, but the corner of his mouth moved. She looked at the road and let herself be happy. Just simply cleanly happy, without finding a practical reason it wasn't as good as it looked, which was what Mabel had told her to do, and which she was, as promised, working on. They were married on the 2nd Saturday of February. Reverend Hurst performed the service in the church where Nathan had sat in the back pew for 2 Sundays in a row before anyone knew why. It was a small wedding, which was what they both wanted. Mabel and James Hurst, Ruth Calder, Pete Sorley, who cried quietly and pretended he wasn't Bill Garrett, and his 3 sons aldermen, who had stayed in Red Creek longer than he'd planned because he said he had some additional matters to attend to, which everyone understood meant he wanted to be there. Clara Finch did not come. Mrs. Pruitt did. Abigail wore a dress that Mabel had helped her make from a deep blue wool, because Mabel had shown up 2 weeks before the wedding with fabric and a purpose and an expression that left no room for argument. She stood at the front of the church in the blue dress and looked at the man at the other end of the aisle. The man who had opened a door and looked at her with careful, measuring eyes and said, "Come in then." And she thought about the advertisement she had read at a kitchen table in Great Falls on a Tuesday morning in October. "Need a capable woman to keep my house. Honest work, fair pay, nothing more. 3 sentences. No promises, no compliments, no grand gestures, just honest words from an honest man. She had understood from the first reading that the nothing more was not the end of the sentence. It was the beginning. Nathan took her hand at the altar with the same care he brought to everything deliberate, unhurried, complete. He had worn his good coat and combed his hair, and the ring on her finger caught the light from the church windows. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since the very first morning, with that careful, serious attention. Only now there was nothing measured about it. Now it was simply open. The way a door is open. He said his words steadily. She said hers the same way. Reverend Hurst said something about love being the work of ordinary days, which she thought was the truest thing anyone had said at any wedding she had ever attended, which was not many. They walked out of the church into the cold February air, and Pete Sorley was crying fully now and not pretending otherwise, and Ruth Calder had her arm around him, with the look of a woman who had decided she didn't mind one bit, and Mabel was smiling with the complete satisfaction of a person whose faith in a particular outcome has been thoroughly vindicated. Nathan kept her hand all the way home. The forge ran well through that spring. Nathan took on 2 apprentices in April, young men from farming families who wanted a trade, who came to the farmhouse twice a week for dinner and left every time a little more fed and a little more steadied than they had arrived, which Abigail had decided was part of what a house was for. Alderman wrote from Helena in March to say that Briggs's investigation had expanded, and that 2 other counties in the territory had filed similar complaints. Ruth Calder began coming to town more often, and Pete Sorley began meeting her at the general store with a regularity that the town noticed and commented on, which Abigail found deeply satisfying. The mantelpiece was no longer bare. She had put 1 things on it, just one placed there quietly one morning without making anything of it. A small framed photograph taken by a traveling photographer who had come through Red Creek in March. Just the 2 of them standing on the porch of their house. Not posed exactly. Nathan had been saying something to her, and she had been looking up at him with the expression she had stopped trying to manage, and the photographer had said that was the one, and she had agreed. Nathan had looked at it for a long time when she put it up. The mantelpiece needed something, she said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. It did. He said nothing else about it. But she caught him more than once in the months that followed. Looking at it, the way he looked at things that mattered to him quietly, without announcement, with the complete attention of a man who does not take good things for granted. Mabel came to dinner one Sunday in May, and sat at their kitchen table with James, and ate Abigail's roast and biscuits, and afterward, when Nathan and James were talking on the porch, leaned across to Abigail and said, "You know what the town calls this house now?" Abigail looked at her. "What?" "The warm house," Mabel said. "Because there's always light in the windows, every evening late. People going past on the road say you can tell just by looking which house has someone in it who means to be there." She looked at Abigail steadily. "They mean you. They mean the both of you together." Abigail looked at this window, at the last light of the May evening coming through it warm and gold. She looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece, and the mended coat on the hook by the door, and the pantry she had organized in the first week, and never stopped maintaining, and the kitchen that had become over the course of one autumn and one winter and one spring genuinely and fully hers. She had arrived with $11 and 1 canvas bag and a promise to herself that she was done expecting kindness. She had found something better than kindness. She had found a man who saw her, who had seen her in his quiet, certain way since the very first morning, who had stacked wood inside the door without saying a word about it and meant everything by that and kept meaning it every day that followed. She thought about the women who had replaced her in 7 houses over 11 years. The younger ones, the prettier ones, the ones who had been chosen because they were easier to look at and cheaper to ignore. She thought about all the rooms she had moved through without leaving a mark, all the families who had thanked her and meant it and still let her go. She thought about standing on a porch in October with 1 canvas bag and making a promise to herself about what she was done expecting. She had been wrong about that. Not about the kindness. She had been right that the world was not reliably kind. But she had been wrong to put a limit on what she would let herself want. She had been wrong to decide that invisible was all she was ever going to be. The strongest person I know lives in my house. Nathan had said that. Had said it to the town in the particular quiet voice that carried anyway on a day when she had not been there to hear it, but had heard about it afterward from Mabel, who had told her word for word, because she knew Abigail needed to hear it word for word. She had stood in the kitchen when Mabel told her and pressed both hands flat against the counter and breathed until she could breathe normally. And then she had made dinner, because that was what she did. Because the ordinary continuance of good work was how she showed the things she did not have enough words for. Nathan came in from the porch when James and Mabel left, and he stood in the doorway and looked at her where she was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee, and she looked back at him. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening," she said. He came in and sat across from her and poured himself coffee from the pot, and they sat in their particular quiet, the one that had been theirs since the very first evening. The one that had never been empty. Not from the beginning, because some silences are not the absence of something, but the presence of everything that doesn't need saying. Outside the window, the May evening was settling into dark. Inside the house, the lamp was burning. If anyone had been passing on the road that night, they would have seen it, the warm light from the windows, steady and unhurried, the kind of light that comes from a house where someone is home and means to stay. That was the thing about a house built by one pair of hands and kept by quiet determination, and entered one October morning by a woman with one canvas bag, who had stopped expecting kindness and found something that outlasted it. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It just keeps its light on evening after evening, year after year, steady in the dark, and everyone who passes knows. Someone in there loves this place. Someone in there is loved.